Hello and welcome. Today I'm super excited that we're going to learn about the basics of governance and best practices for non-profit boards. I'm delighted to introduce to you Vinciane, or V, as she said earlier. She doesn't mind being called, who's going to lead the workshop. V comes from 20 years of experience specializing in the area of operations management in both the private and public sector. She's currently working at ICANN as a senior director of board operations and has her own consultancy where she focuses on organizational excellence. So with that, I'm going to hand over to V for the rest of the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vinciane, for the nice intro. And hi, everyone. This is fabulous. I'm just going to let Nick in. Voila. It's fabulous to actually meet you today. And yes, I'm sure you're very excited. Yet another Zoom meeting after a year of COVID, but I can promise you I will try to make it as bearable and as interesting as possible. A little disclaimer before we start. This is a Zoom background. I didn't drink the bottles behind me, so feel totally safe. What you would learn today normally should be interesting and relevant. On the other hand, I hope you see the cats, and that's made on purpose because there are scientific evidence that cats actually provide good vibes and good emotions and boost energy. And I think that as we are going to dive into governance, which is for most people at least a word not exactly exciting initially, those cats are going to help me make you change your mind about that. I think from experience, the tech industry is generally very high on governance. And the reason for that, if you think about it, is normally rules are not very compatible with creativity and progress, right? So the tech industry has a bit of a learn as we go culture. But governance shouldn't be something felt as boring or heavy. Actually, to the contrary, and this is what we're going to see today together. If you have a good governance in place in your organization and good principle in place, you improve how you work. You basically become more performing. And in doing so, you actually free time. So you be more creative. So I hope that I will manage in those 2 hours to convince you about that. One thing I think Vinciane mentioned as well, please, this training is not meant to be a top-down approach. Make it your own. So don't hesitate, ask questions. If we don't manage to go through the entire deck, it doesn't really matter. You will be provided with the slide and I will be reachable. So you will see my email address after this discussion. And so please feel free to reach out. I'm not on the clock. So it's, make this training your own. So it's a key message. And with that, we're going to go to the presentation. Before we really talk about governance per se, I wanted to touch on something very important because unfortunately, and even though the UK announced yesterday that the end of this nightmare is close, likelihood is that you will still spend a little bit of time on Zoom meetings. And for board, especially, when you meet, it's quite important that you are efficient. So sorry, Bishai, can we go back one slide? And so I wanted to tell you how to try to reduce the Zoom fatigue and make sure that your meetings are actually efficient. And quite early on in the COVID pandemic, the Harvard Business Review did a study on how to basically, well, the do's and don'ts, if you want, of the Zoom survival. So Zoom survival guide. One important thing for board when you have session is build an agenda and have a structured agenda, which means as well, time it. So just don't, put topics and say, okay, we are going to discuss this. Yes, but how long are you going to allocate to a topic? It's very important because then it allows you to actually complete your agenda. At least by the end of the meeting, you will normally have gone through the topics that you had listed. But as you do that, build in breaks. It's important. Don't stick to your screen too long. Just build in breaks. Make sure you actually stop a little bit and stretch your legs and so on. one thing which is easier said than done is avoid multitasking. The tendency when you are on Zoom is actually, I'm going to do my emails and I'm going to check my Skype messages, and sometimes even I'm going to, catch up on other things. It's a bad idea, actually. And I know because I have the tendency to do the same, but it's a relatively bad idea, especially for board members doing a board session. And last but not least, try to reduce stimuli, which means if you can avoid having a video on your screen with the team you prefer playing, it's probably a good idea as well. Can we go to the next slide, Bijan? And I'm afraid with this, I actually lost track of everything else. So I can't see the chat, I can't see the picture. So I will do my best. If you raise your hand and I'm not calling your name, please let me know. I just can't see you. All right, can we maybe, yeah. I hope you still see the presentation. Thank you. Okay, the agenda for today. We're going to start with something which is very basic but very important. If you don't get this right, it's going to be difficult to actually perform. So there is a difference between governance and management, and we are going to see that in a minute. Then we will dive into the 10 basic responsibilities for a non-for-profit board. And then you will have a break for about 10 minutes, so to stretch our legs. And we will go after in the pre-recs that you had, which was an article from David Nadler from the Harvard Business Review. And if you didn't have the opportunity to read it, don't worry, we are going to discuss that together. And last but not least, we will have a Q&A session if you are left with some unanswered questions. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so governance and management, and I'm purposefully not saying versus management, because I think, and that's critical for you to understand, the governing body and the management actually work together as equal partners. So they don't do the same thing, they don't have the same responsibilities, they are partners. And it's important as well to understand the word equal in the sense that, yes, the CEO reports into the board, but they still have to work together in a very close and very tight relationship. The definition of governance, to make it easier, I would say that governance is the what. So basically, the governance provides the framework, provide the vision, provide the strategy. What is the organization? What is the business going to do, right? What is the vision and what is the direction that the organization should be taken? And on the other hand, the CEO and the senior management is the how. So how are we going to reach those objectives? How are we going to, I think I have a question in the chat, sorry. Is the CEO by definition not the person in charge of vision and strategy? How does this work out? No, well, actually, tricky question, Stefan. No, the CEO is in charge of delivering on the strategy. So the CEO is the person who is going to work with his staff, the senior management and other staffer to make sure that they reach the goals that have been set by the board. So, but please keep in mind that, again, the CEO works with the board to define the strategy. So it's not only, again, it's not a top-down approach. It's not the board saying, this is the vision, this is a strategy, and this is what you should be doing. A good practice is actually to have the CEO fully involved in the development of this vision and strategy to make sure that then the CEO is capable of implementing and putting in place the processes to reach those goals. Did I answer your question? So where do you see the COO? Well, the COO reports into the CEO. So again, that's basically the CEO reports into the board and works very closely with the board. The COO reports into the CEO, right? So the COO, if you want, will have a role in implementing the operations, in doing, basically putting into practice what he will be told by the CEO. Is that clear? It's a very sign. Merci. Okay, pleasure. All right, and that actually is a good link, Stefan, to the list that you see on the screen, or at least you see that on the screen, which basically is what management is supposed to do. So management is responsible for executing strategic goals, planning and basically doing the operations, managing the processes, etc., etc. So what you see there. But again, remember, and we can go to the next slide, Vijay, please. Thank you. Remember that to have a successful organization, it's really a partnership. And I put here on your slide, work as equal members of a team rather than a subordinate to the other. Okay, so the roles and responsibilities are different, yet they are very much complementary. Just a second, because then there is a little quiz. The board should refrain from getting directly involved in daily matters, and that's sometimes the tendency. And I think most board members actually means well. It's not that they really want to overstep or be too involved, but sometimes they raise questions, but it's inappropriate, and we will discuss that a little bit further. And on the other hand, the board should ask questions and seek information from the management, but to a certain level. So not get too involved in the daily matters, in the daily business. And so I wanted to test a little bit your current knowledge of this governing body and management relationship. And so I had a few questions for you. So who do you think is responsible to assess the community and the stakeholder needs between the board or the management? Whose responsibility is that? Raise your hand. I don't hear anything. I can't see the chat. Oh, here it is. Stefan, you're saying management. Okay. Anyone else? Management. Okay. Both. Thank you, Aline. Running daily business. Both. All right. Interesting. So, Bijan, we can click, and so now we have the answers. It's actually primarily a board responsibility. So it's really something, because you are going to use those data, well, the information you get, right? What does the stakeholder need? It's actually something that is going to help you develop the strategy. So that's primarily a board role to understand very well what your stakeholder expects and what the community expects, right? And we can go to the next question. The chat, let's see. No question, okay. Who is responsible for maintaining relationship with key partners? Board or management? Management, okay. Management, okay. Seems like you're all in agreement, it's management, and we can go to the answer. It's actually both. So you are right, you're partly right. You are right because, of course, if the CEO has to be involved in that. But on the other hand, one of the key responsibility of boards is actually to advocate for the mission and the vision of the organization. And we will definitely see that on another slide in just a few minutes. Stefan, you say we see also that members of board are also C-level management. Yes. Is this not a problem that I have on? Yes, it is a problem. Yeah, absolutely, it is a problem. You have to have separation of responsibility. Yes, absolutely. It can be a very serious issue. And as I said initially, getting this relationship and getting those responsibilities between board/governing bodies and management right is crucial for the success and for the performance of your organization. Absolutely. Okay, last question, and then we will go to the next slide. Who's responsible for preparing the annual budget of the organization? Management, okay. Yes, you're correct. It's actually the management. That's a very operational task. This is definitely management. You're correct, Andy. You are right. So it's definitely a CEO and staff responsibility. What happens though is, of course, the CEO would prepare the budget, but the board has the oversight, right? So the CEO's responsibility is then to make sure that the board is well aware of how the money is going to be used. So thank you for your time with this little quiz. And you see, it's not always that easy. It's a little bit tricky to understand who does what and how to find the right balance of responsibility. Okay, Bisha, we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. And with that, we're going to look a little bit more at the basic responsibilities, in particular of non-for-profit board, but not only, of course, in generally speaking, about boards. So critical, determine the mission, vision, and advocate for them. When you are going to recruit new people on the board, you want to make sure that newcomers have a very clear understanding of what the organization is doing. So what is the purpose of the organization, right? And sometimes it's not that easy because it's not something most onboarding sessions don't spend a lot of time with that, but this is critical. So I wanted to understand, for example, if when you joined EuroIX, you had an opportunity to review the Article of Association. So I don't know if we have all the board members. I know we have some, Eileen, for example. So did you ever read the Article of Association of EuroIX?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well done. Okay, good.
There's a lot of it I didn't get, but I did read it. We even changed some bits, V.
No, and I totally understand because I read them myself and they were, I had some question mark as well. But at least the good thing is that you at least know what you're supposed to do as a board, right? You have the vision, you have the mission of your EX very clear. And we're actually going to the next slide, Bija, so we can actually look at that. Yes, is the mission clear? Thank you. And then the next slide, please. Thank you. And those are the articles of association, and specifically what EuroIX is about. And it says that this is an association which is going to, whose object is actually the building, distribution, and developing of know-how and information in the field of internet exchange points, and all that contributes to this in the widest sense of the word. And this is why we are here, right? You are building knowledge in this association. So the association will not aim at making a profit, okay? And last but not least, the activities of the association will not be in competition with individual members' activities. Why did I want to go through this? I think, sorry, Eileen, so what, Andy Davidson and Nurani are both your IX are in this call too. Okay, nice, thank you. I didn't see the name before, so thank you for that. So basically, the reason why I wanted to review this with you is I'm going to give you an example. When I worked for UN agencies in the past, the board of those agencies are very often made of people that have a political agendas because they are either ministers or civil servants. And so they join a board of an agency with their own political agenda. And that is not going to work. Because what you need to do, and that is very hard to do, of course, when you join a board, you have to let the hat of your own organization, of your own agendas at the door and act only to complete the mission and in the best interest of the organization and the public interest, in the case of a non-for-profit board, definitely, of the organization, right? And that's something which is sometimes very difficult to do, especially as you know, if you're appointed by a government, you are on a timeline and you want to complete so many things. And by the way, you also want to be reappointed and re-elected. So you have to deliver. Well, yes, but that's a challenge. When you are on the board of an organization, you have to act in the best interest of this organization. And so in the case of EuroIX, no matter where you come from, your role as board member is actually to stick to this mission, right? Do you think it's actually something that most of you and those of you who are board members or who have interest in becoming board members are succeeding with? Is that something difficult for you to do? Andy, for example.
I was just looking for the unmute button. Yes, this is something that so these are, I maybe ought to say I'm speaking for myself rather than as the full board, because I am on the EuroIX board, and this is a question about whether the EuroIX board looks at this. But I would say that reviewing our strategy in line with what we have been convened to do is something we do at least every year, at least, because although the object of the association hasn't changed over the course of the last couple of decades, we're trying to build and distribute know-how and information exactly as it's described in this paragraph. The vehicle for doing that changes over time because members have different expectations for how they can interact with the association in order to get information and know-how. And the format of our events has changed. For example, this year, one of the most important things we have to do as an organization is put different internet exchange points in the same room as each other, which has been impossible to do for the last 12 months. So the way that we change our work in line with what is possible to do, in line with what members want us to do, changes all the time. But we absolutely come back to this sentence at least every year. And this is why we've new projects like our database and API came about, because we worked out that this would be a way that we could reduce the friction in exchanging knowledge and know-how between our member exchanges. So yes, it is. I think that we do look at this, but even though the activity plan, the work that we do every year, might look quite different from year to year.
Thank you, Andy, and very good. Very well. First of all, congratulations! It's fabulous what you're doing. It's great. I think you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, good.
It's very important. Actually, you touched on the next slide. What we can do, Bija, we can go to the next slide. You actually touched on the strategic aspect. Thank you for that. And so, yes, another key responsibility of the board is indeed to engage in strategic thinking and planning, and that cannot be set in stone. So what you are explaining, Andy, is it's exactly right. This is what you have to do. So a board member and a board has the responsibility in engaging in this strategic thinking and looking at how to evolve, basically, and how to be, I wouldn't say only reactive. Yes, sometimes you have to be reactive. If you look at the COVID crisis, of course, nobody was really expecting that, well, except Bill Gates and a few researchers, but businesses and organizations had to all of a sudden, deal with their strategy and realign the strategy to make sure they can deal with the adverse effect of this pandemic. So strategy is something that has to be flexible. So we can go to the next slide, Bijan, because I wanted to go a little bit further on that aspect as well. Can we go to the next slide, Bijan? Thank you so much. And actually, this is the definition of the Center for Management and Organization Effectiveness. What is strategic thinking? Because sometimes, we hear those names and we don't really understand what it entails and what it means. What it means is an intentional and rational thought process that focuses on the analysis of critical factors and variables that will influence the long-term success of a business, a team, or an individual. And I think this is actually what you just described, Andy, right? You are having those discussions on the EuroIX board, which is really good. One aspect to that, and I don't know, Andy, I see your picture, which is great because I can't see anybody else. So but I don't know if it's because you were trying to say something or not.
No, I realized I've been chatting away and hadn't been on video, so that's the only reason I turned it on.
Very good, thank you. No worries. All right, what I wanted to actually underline here is that very often, and it's a very good opportunity to build a partnership with the CEO and with the management when you do this strategic exercise. This is the moment where you actually have a little bit of a team building, right? You work with your CEO and you do this basically SWOT analysis, right? You identify threats, challenges, weaknesses, strengths, etc., and you work together. And so that, I think Stefan mentioned earlier, but who is responsible basically for making sure that we comply with the vision and the strategy? And this is where all this folds together, because you develop the strategy as a board, you develop the strategy with your CEO, and you make sure the CEO and the senior management is aligned with that vision and those strategic goals, right? And again, flexibility is the word. Yes, you have to go back to your strategy and you have to look at whether it still aligns with the reality, whether it still aligns with your environments. And definitely in the tech industry, the tech industry is so, it changed overnight. It's one of those very, very, very dynamic industries. So you can't afford to let a year or 2 years definitely go by without going back to your strategic plan. Yes. Any question about that? I see none. Okay, so next responsibility, next slide. Thank you very much, Vishal. So another key aspect, and it's of course a little bit barbaric sometimes, but yes, as board members, you are responsible for the fiscal oversight and also the risk management of the organization. Unfortunately, you will be responsible if anything happens with the tax return. That's the board's responsibility. So yes, the CEO does the budget, the board has the oversight on the budget, but end of the day, if something goes wrong, if there isn't a fraud, for example, if there is a fraud in the organization, if you don't comply with the regulatory framework, that's the board's responsibility. So make sure that you know what's happening in your organization. Make sure that you know that everything is done properly and ethically. And that's also part of the next bullet point, which is the risk management. I think it's we have seen quite a bit of that happening recently with the pandemic. Managing risk is extremely complicated. You can have a very good strategic planning that entails a few tracks, right? But you also have to have a risk management framework in place, because then you have to know how to react when something like a pandemic hit, right? And what we have witnessed, especially during those past 12 months, is many organizations didn't have the ability to deal with this pandemic, either because, for example, they didn't have sufficient reserve funds, or they didn't have the ability to convert, from a face-to-face interaction, like a proper office-only organization, to a virtual world. It's been extremely challenging for many organizations to do that. Many people are not used, basically, if you think about that. It's definitely not your case, but many people are not used to work remotely. Many organizations didn't have a Zoom platform. So all those kind of things, actually, we learned from this pandemic. We know now that it has to be part of a risk management strategy. Is that something that you have in place at EuroIX? Do you have a risk management strategy? Maybe we can ask Aileen or another board member. Nourani, I hope I'm pronouncing the first name okay. So Aileen or Nourani, any experience in risk management within EuroIX?
So the risks, I guess, is something that we perhaps discuss quite regularly. And certainly in the last year, it's taken quite a lot of thought, because of the amount of risks over the last year, more so than I think we probably had in the last 20 years of EuroIX, just worrying about individuals or about choices we're making because of COVID. I don't believe, and Bijal, you can correct me on this, I don't believe within the governance documents we have currently that we have a specific risk document, but it's it kind of forms part of all of the things that we do. We sort of analyze things against our own sort of versions of it, but I don't know that we have anything specifically written down. Now, I may be wrong, but I don't think we do.
Well, it's already good that you're speaking about that. It's already good that you're aware that as a board, this is part of your responsibility, that you have to make sure, of course, that you provide against those things, or at least you try to mitigate against those risks. So it's already a good start. You don't necessarily need to have a written strategy, but you definitely need, and I think, Nourani, you wanted to say something because you appeared on my screen, so I guess you wanted to intervene.
I just wanted to add to that. I think, I don't believe that we have, a documented a process for this, but I do think, like Eileen described it quite adequately, that there's a high awareness of this, and we have discussions about it. I should add, though, that the EUR-IEX is, I think, was one of the reasons that, this is not that we have maybe a bit more of an informal approach. It's also that under normal circumstances, or under most circumstances, even slightly abnormal circumstances, it's a fairly predictable organization, and the activities are fairly predictable. We have a very stable membership, and we don't, the activities that the EUR-IEX carries out are quite predictable from year to year. So there are not many changes really happening, except for, of course, like this year now, that we haven't been able to carry out the events as per usual. But in some ways, it's more of a coordinating body. So it also means that it's not, because it has a fairly stable membership, it's also not so vulnerable to quick changes in the industry. So I think that's also why it's been managed in this way in the past. I can't speak for previous years before I was there.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And you used the right word. So awareness is the key word here. I think as long as the board is aware, at least of the key threats, right, and knows how to mitigate against that, you're already completing one of the key responsibilities of the board. So, and yeah, you're right. It's probably your particular organization is not as sensitive as many others, actually, to risk, but it's good still to make sure that, and you've seen that with this past year, that at least you have an understanding on your responsibilities vis-a-vis risk. All right, thank you very much for that. I don't know if anybody else, not necessarily on the EUR-IEX board, had a question about that or wanted to speak about how they manage risk, for example, during those terrible 12 months. No, I don't see anyone. Okay, good. So
I suppose what we did, and I know that this is well known within the community that's on here now, is, and I guess this is partly maybe that we don't write all of the details down of these things normally, but at the beginning of COVID at INEX, we undertook quite a big sort of conversation and preparation of a COVID response document that did look at everything. It looked at everything from the risk of driving your car to a data center to the risk to the business in terms of the fiscal risk. So we did do it then, but I guess in normal times, what we do within INEX is we're constantly looking at the wall to see, well, does this expose us to this? Does this create opportunity? Does it create risk? So I guess a lot of it is sort of latent rather than it sort of being something we actually put down in paper. And that may be something to do with the nature of the people involved in the industry, that you're constantly asking yourself, is this going to work? Because a lot of the people in the industry are running networks. So every time they unplug something or change a piece of code, they have to have already made 25 million decisions of, is this going to break something else? So risk taking is part of their nature, but also undertaking risks carefully is also part of their nature. So I don't know if you've a thought on whether or not we should write more down, or if the processes we follow is okay. And I'd be interested in that from a EUR-IEX perspective as well. We do a lot of it passively.
Yes, no, and that's good. That's the essential. Sorry, I'm French speaking, so sometimes my English stays stuck in the. It's the essential part of it, right? So as long as you do it, you're doing the right thing. No, one point with regard to writing is you somehow want to transmit. Okay, you are on the board for some time. You might be staying on the board for much longer, or maybe not. So you want somehow to have an institutional memory as well. You don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel all the times. So having a trace of what's happened and the good decision, actually somehow measuring success, right? Measuring whether the risk mitigation that you had in place and how you did actually, how that worked, might be useful, right? But again, it doesn't have to be heavy. It doesn't have to be a full document on how you mitigate risk, because as you are saying, it actually is very flexible, right? So you can't go as far as setting a risk matrix and a risk pattern, but having somehow an institutional memory of what you did during those crises, and especially the mitigation put in place, could be something good. And I see Luca on the screen, so maybe Luca, you wanted to say something. I'm sorry, I'm actually blind here. I see people appearing when they apparently want to speak. So
so I am muted just a little while. So first of all, I joined late, so apologizes for people who don't know me. I'm Luca Cicchelli of Topics, and I'm also a former EuroEX board member. As you asked some comments, I really appreciated what related on the previous slide related to the duties of the board members, because I'm particularly looking in my association. I'm employed in a local consortium, and I have to say that not always board members are representing the consortium, but sometimes they're board members but working for their own companies. So this is not good. So it was really good for me to hear that. Secondly, I was trying to remember when I was in the board, and sometimes I was speaking about more than 6 or 7 years ago, so many years, ages ago, we talked about the risks, but we didn't have a written risk analysis. But the fact that you mentioned that it's important to talk about the risks, even if you don't have a written document, is a good thing. So I really appreciated that.
Well, thank you, Luca, and I'm happy if it can be useful to you. It's definitely the reason why I'm here for you today. And yes, I think it's very hard to have people that don't understand their role as board members and can't detach from basically the organization they are representing. So I feel for you. It's a challenge. It's something I hope you will manage to change over time. It's a patience game, but then you will have to repeat it over and over again, and use those slides. Take them. It's try to use those best practices and repeat to them basically what they are supposed to do. That's right, their responsibility.
Well, I think my message was correctly understood. So I was not talking about EuroEX, because when I was at EuroEX, the experience was very good, very open. So different point of views, but every board member really worked for the association, not for each own company. But I'm Italian, so sometimes in Italy people do not think over their mindset. I don't know if there are other Italians in today, but I think no.
Guarda, io parlo italiano, il mio marito sta
okay.
Italiano. No, I'm just saying for the others.
You're multi-language, of course. You're spanning from Italian to French, of course, but you can show these ideas with your husband.
That's right. My husband is Italian. That was a private joke to Luca. So yes, I understand. But having said that, Luca, no, we understand we understood you were talking about your current business and not about the EuroEX board. And I just hope you can use what you're learning today to make things a little bit easier for you in your current role.
Thank you very much.
Most welcome. All right, Vinciane, maybe we can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. Oh, it's a little bit wordy, and the reason I was saying a little bit earlier to Bijal, the reason why those slides are wordy is I wanted to make sure, in case we don't go through all the deck together, that you have not only the title, and the definitions, but a little bit more explanation, so it can be still useful. So another responsibility of the board is to ensure adequate resources, and I guess that you all understand that. It's your responsibility to make sure that the money is there and the money is well used as well. I'm going to go a little bit faster on this slide, but please again interrupt me and ask questions if any. Another responsibility is to determine, monitor, and strengthen the organization programs and services, right? So while, and that's for Stefan maybe in particular, while basically the CEO and the management will be most of the time the ones proposing the project that are aligned with the strategy that has been defined. It's still the board's responsibility to make sure that those projects are actually successful, the money is well used, and if something doesn't work, well, we're going to have to change that, they're going to have to disappear. It's still the board's responsibility to check that what is being done by the organization is actually the right thing to do, okay? And now we had this question in the little quiz earlier. So enhance the organization public image. Yes, that's a board role. And of course, the CEO and the senior management. And if you think about that, the entire staff is also part of it, right? You work for an organization. You're part of this organization. You somehow are the face of the organization. But that's definitely a board's role to enhance the public image of the organization. Any question about that? Because I saw that a few people didn't understand initially that it was more a board responsibility than a management responsibility. Is that clear now? Or is it still something a little bit difficult to apprehend?
I think it's difficult as both a board member and a team member when you're not a board member to understand the demarcation between what is a board function in support of these bullet points and what is a management team function in support of these points. So, for example, it's absolutely a board responsibility to determine, monitor, and strengthen the organization's program and services. And as you say, if something is working, that should be championed. If something is not working, that should be ceased. But in the detail there's quite a lot of operational activity. And just if something isn't working, the board should be able to monitor, strengthen, and provide that oversight at arm's length. Otherwise, they're not a functioning oversight board. And I think as small organizations where sometimes the skills of the board are needed on an executive basis or in a operational basis, maintaining that arm's reach is really, really, really hard. And EuroIX is a good example, but many of our membership organizations that themselves are members of EuroIX, that can be even harder where the boards in these organizations have got operational responsibility in the day-to-day organization as well. How do you think how should an organization structure, this might be a really big, horrible question, I'm sorry, but how does an organization structure to provide that kind of oversight and monitoring and support with the arm's length basis between the board and the management team?
Yeah, no, it's not a horrible question, but it's a question that calls for well, the good thing, because you were talking about the size of the board. So one important thing to understand is, if I take the example of EuroIX, you are 7 members on the board. It's a good size. It's not too many. So it's actually, it's not unmanageable. When you have too many board members, what you just described as a situation becomes a lot more difficult, right? Because then you have a lot more point of views. So first of all, you have to be aligned. So if the entire board is in agreement that basically something is broken, something is not functioning, then of course you have the oversight. You have, of course, then the opportunity to basically tell your CEO, because that's the person with whom you interact, right? Well, this is not working, and ask the right questions. So this is basically, first you have to be aligned as board members. If you have 7 people that have 7 different point of views and 7 different comments, and you go to the CEO and you say, well, actually you should do this, and the other person said you should do that, that's not going to get any better, right? So first you have to be aligned. Then if you read the paper, I don't know if you had the opportunity to read the paper, they are describing the different type of boards you might have. You might have a passive board, you might have the kind of rubber stamp board. So basically they just, they just look at what the CEO is doing and, oh yeah, that's fine, that's okay. You can have an intervening board, and you can have even an operational board, which is basically what you were describing in some of your association, if I understood you correctly. And then you have what I would recommend as a good way of working. You have an engaged board, which means you are nose in, fingers out. So yes, you're understanding exactly what is happening, right? But you are not operational. And you can, of course, recommend, you have expertise, you yourself, or I don't know what role exactly you have. And I'm not talking about the board, I mean your experience, right? What you bring at the board level. Yes, you have expertise, and you're totally fine recommending to the CEO, you know what, from experience, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. But it still shouldn't be, it's only should be a recommendation. Am I making myself clear? Right. So it's different from being intervening and being engaged and asking the right question and having this kind of dialogue with the CEO and trying to basically work together. Is that answering more or less your question?
Yeah, perfectly clear. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Nose in, fingers out is an incredible phrase. Thank you. That is now going into my reservoir of phenomenal phrases. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I hope it exists. It's a translation from a French.
It's perfect. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect, and it I think it says everything very simply. So thank you.
Most welcome.
I have a question about that level of engagement of the board. Shall I throw it in now, or do you want to do it at the end?
Go ahead. No, please go.
All right. Well, so one thing that I've seen in a few boards, so I read the material you provided before, which I found very interesting, and I recognize all those different types of boards and the different levels of engagement. And one thing that I've seen in a few places is, particularly maybe in this industry, I don't know, that you have a board that's quite disengaged, that in many cases there might be political appointments or simply appointments because you want people from the industry there, and they're mostly doing the bare minimum. But then if something happens, something goes wrong, or something, or all of a sudden they're not happy with the organization, it then turns to the other scale of things, where they then become this intervening board, or they want 1 million reports, so they want to go in and not only have the nose in, but their fingers and everything as well. So I was wondering if you could share any good piece of advice or tips or tricks for when you see that, whether you're a CEO or you are actually on that board, and you can see that maybe the level of knowledge of the industry is not high enough in order to be a well-engaged board, or that they don't understand the organization well enough. So to avoid this sort of crisis, so that if you have any good advice on how do you sort of manage that board, how do you get that board up to the right level of engagement to avoid that sort of that split and then all the aftermath of it?
Yes, thank you very much. Very good question, and I hope you're going to be pleased to know that we are going to answer it really into details in the second section actually of this training. But very briefly to answer you, basically what you're describing is disengaged board that becomes very intervening, because of course they are freaking out. At the end of the day, they are responsible if something goes wrong, right? So when they realize something is wrong, they are panicking, and they are becoming the exact opposite of what they should be, right? So you want to make sure your board is engaged, and there are a lot of good things you can be doing actually to make sure that this is the case. Capacity building, training, team building as well, because a board is a team. And you have to build this team. You have to make sure that those people learn to work together. So all those kind of things are actually crucial, and that's part of the CEO's responsibility as well. So it's a board share responsibility, of course, right? Especially and foremost, but not only. The CEO has a role as well, because if the CEO actually sees, for example, that the board is dysfunctioning, he or she is going to get into trouble. So one of the responsibilities of the CEO is to make sure that the board has the opportunity to actually develop, grow, learn to work together. But I would say, most importantly, it also starts from recruitment. It depends on the people you have on the board. If you have a bad recruitment, you're going to struggle a lot more than if you have the right set of people around the table. So there is an entire, if you want, development cycle of a board. This is part of the slide, and I hope we will reach it. Otherwise, not a problem. We can discuss that offline as well. But yes, you have to have a good recruitment, and then you have to have a good training process. And you don't stop training, you don't stop learning, and you don't stop team building. Your board keeps growing, your board keeps developing. And if you don't do that, you will have, and it doesn't matter which industry you're on, you will have a disengaged board. And then you will have a board panicking if something goes wrong. Absolutely. And I've seen that in any industry, honestly, literally. So we will definitely answer this question in the slides further. Thank you. Very good point. All right. Any other question or any other suggestion maybe, or things that you would like to share here? If not, we're going to look at the last bullet point. I'm not going to skip it. No, sorry. Vinciane, thank you so much. The last bullet point of this slide is actually, of course, one of the board responsibilities to select and support the chief executive officer and review his or her performance. So that's also same thing, right? You have to get the recruitment right and to make sure that that the organization and the vision that you have for the organization is fulfilled. So voila. Next slide then. Thank you, Vinciane, very much. Thank you. And there we go. Develop board capacity to ensure strong engagement. Oh, just a second. Computer going to sleep. There we go. The board is responsible, and this is the point we just had in Urani, for the cultivation, recruitment, education, and evaluation of the board members. Okay. But again, I insist, it's also the CEO should be involved in this process. Some ideas to develop board capacity. Training programs, of course. It's a tiny piece of advice, but especially for the ones based in the UK, enroll to Directors Institute. So it's I don't know if you're familiar with that, but those are institutes everywhere. So in every country you have Directors Institute. They always have free resources. Sometimes they have free trainings actually. And it's also a way for directors from different organizations to just exchange tricks, right? So that could be an opportunity in running. I don't know where you're based, but that could be are you based in which country, sorry?
I'm based in Sweden.
No, definitely. Yeah, I think there is an institute of directors. I actually think, yeah, there are quite a few over there. So good opportunity, good resources. So look, for those kind of easy tricks, right? Mentorship program, that could be also something for you in the sense that when you have newcomers on the board, you could basically make sure they are accompanied on their journey. So you have people that are more seasoned, so board members that have a lot more experience. Make sure that the newcomers have opportunities to interact with those people, build relationship, build what we call board buddies, so that they are not just alone on this journey on the board. So all those kind of little things can help develop board capacity. Next slide, Bija. Thank you very much. And I think this is the last of the responsibilities I had. So organize the board to operate efficiently. Well, I think it seems very basic, but it's not always the case. Basically, it's very unusual for a board to basically only have a few board meetings and be capable of dealing with everything during those board meetings. So it requires a lot more involvement, a lot more meetings. And one of the recommendations I would have is have committees, right? So don't wait for being a full board to actually solve some issues or discuss some aspects, right? So if you have board committees, and I think that your IX, you have at least the executive committees, correct, Bija? I think you're muted.
Sorry. We have some committees within the board. Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good thing. So the committees actually are there to help the board deal with part of their work and the workload, right? So I think that with that we have reviewed the 10 basic responsibilities, and maybe you want to take a short break before we dive into the second part of the training. How is that?
Actually, V, can I ask you on the subcommittees? I suppose one of the issues with subcommittees is when you create a subcommittee and they are tasked with going away and, you know, engaging on some particular topic. Let's say it's you know, somewhere to expand, an expansion program, something like that. And then they come to sort of semi-conclusions within their subcommittee, and then it percolates back up into the full board for an actual board decision. And then you have people there who actually are starting from zero again in that whole process. So when you're on a subcommittee, you've gone through a whole process of thoughts and risk analysis and everything else, and then it's percolated back up. How do you stop it going back to zero again so that you're actually starting this process all over again? That's perhaps the bit that I kind of struggle with within the committees. When you bring the committee stage back into the full board stage for ratification, how do you stop it going back to zero?
Very good question, Aileen. And I would say it's a recurring thing, right? It's something that happens not only, don't worry, not only in your case, but in most boards. It's a trust issue, right? If you trust the committee, what is a committee? A committee should be, at least, ideally, the right set of people set around the table to solve a particular issue, right? It can be a governance committee, in which case they should look at all the governance aspect. Could be a risk committee, they look at the risk aspect. Could be a finance committee. So normally you have financial, people that are good at reading financials. You have to trust those people to make the right choices, right? So you have to build trust in this committee so that when it goes back to the board doesn't start questioning what they have been doing. So to answer your question, yes, you need to build trust. If you have those loop, you did that, but actually we should be doing that, etc. It's because there is a trust issue, and that can be solved, but again, it's not something that is solved overnight. It's a capacity building thing, right? Somehow, if you empower a group of people to work on a specific project, in the case of what you were describing, you should know that those people are going to make the right choices. And when they come back with their recommendation to the full board, I wouldn't say that the full board should just rubber stamp what they have decided. They are totally entitled to ask questions. It's actually healthy to ask questions. And how did you get to that conclusion? But at least, no, don't open the door to a full round of questioning and, start over from scratch. Otherwise, it's purposeless. I mean, it's pointless. You shouldn't have committees. So trust issue there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Learn the basics, you have learned the good principles, and we're gonna now dive into how to be not only a good board, but to be actually a high impact board. And I had provided you, I think, with a pre-read. So I hope you had an opportunity to read this article. If it's not the case, not a big deal. We are going to look at the principles actually that were laid out in this pre-read. So it was a Harvard Business article, which unfortunately was a little bit dated. I looked for a new one because I wanted to have new data. Not that the principles have changed, but I wanted to have new numbers, if you want. I couldn't find any. I think it's still very good for you. And I think, Nourani, you said that you enjoyed the reading. So I hope it's been useful. So the first big principle, if you want to be a high impact board, is that you have to have the right mindset. What does that mean? And something which many people have asked questions about that. It means that you have to agree to self-assessment, not only as individual board members, but also as the full board, right? And you have to be in this mindset of keep improving, keep coming back to basically questioning yourself. Am I doing the right thing for the organization? Am I fulfilling the purpose? Am I being effective? And again, as an individual board member and as a board in itself. Self-assessments are a critical part of the success of a board. It should be, it's not something you have to do necessarily every year, but it should still be something you do regularly, and definitely before a critical part of your activity. And one of those critical parts is the recruitment, right? Thank you, Leo. Yeah, good article. So the recruitment, you want to get it right, because as I said initially, it starts from there. You want to have the right people on your board. You have to build this team, and to build a team, you have to make sure that people can work together, right? And it's also a question, of course, and that's probably the most important aspect, you have to have the right skill sets. It's nice to be appointed to the board because you're popular. It's like a beauty contest, right? Yeah, well, he or she has been appointed because she had a lot of people voting for him or her. It doesn't suffice. If you want to have a functioning board and an efficient board, you have to have some skills. And at least if you don't have the skills, then you have to be willing to build them. Self-assessing actually will help you identify the skill gap, right, initially. Two different things. You can do on a regular basis a self-assessment, an individual self-assessment. So you look at yourself and you go like, okay, how did I perform? There are tools online. It's actually free. Most of them are free. And those are very useful. So that's a recommendation I would have for you is, and for your CEO in the case, so Bijar, for example, for your IX, it's good that basically you do that on a regular basis, right? But it's also important to do a 360 if you want, right? So as a board, to understand basically how you are working as a team. And one of the things that is useful to use before you recruit someone, once you have done self-assessment, you look at your board and you identify the critical skills that are missing. And you want to have newcomers that can offer those skills. So I take a basic example, but if you have a lot of lawyers on the board and no one that can read financials, you're missing a key skill. You're actually missing someone that will point you toward potential risk. And you have fiscal oversight, right? You have fiscal responsibility for the organization and fiduciary responsibility. So you might want to look when you recruit someone, actually, for someone who has those skills, right? So having this right mindset, starting from basically, yes, putting myself into the question, doing a self-assessment, agreeing to the fact that, yes, you might have to keep learning and to keep improving, and you might not always get good feedback from your fellow board members is actually critical. Any question about that? Any experience? Usually when I say that during the training, I have tons of hands up and people, asking questions about self-assessment because it's not comfortable, but that's important.
I'm happy to comment quickly. I think that's unfortunately often not done properly on board levels, and it's often maybe seen as something slightly sensitive. The other challenge, I think, when it comes to this thing about building boards with good complementary sets of competences, because that's what you're after, right? Is that I think, for a lot of these types of non-profit boards, they're elections from the community who look for, to touch upon what you were talking about before, who look for people who can cover their particular interest or who shall represent them as a stakeholder group or represent their interests, and then it's difficult to marry that with the need for certain competencies on the board. And I'm myself in a position to actually select people onto another board, and they're all, of course, volunteers. They're all people who have particular interests in this board, and it's yes, it's difficult to sort of to find the right candidates, not just people who can serve on a board, but people who actually complement the set of competencies on the board.
You're right, Nurani. It's difficult and it's uncomfortable to be in your position, of course, because it's a tough choice, right? Well, one aspect is how do you attract, because you were mentioning volunteers, and it's very often the case in non-for-profit boards, right? People are not paid, or they have very little fees. So how do you attract good candidates? It's not very attractive, and it's not very appealing to people to actually go and work sometimes a lot for free. So it's a challenge to build a good pool of candidates. And one of the reasons why it's so important for board members to actually enhance the public image of the organization. Remember, it's one of those responsibilities that were identified. It's because also it attracts good people on your board. So everything is related, if you want, right? And yes, it's a challenge. And I'm not saying that the self-assessment will solve the kind of issues that you were mentioning, because if you only have those people, well, you know, they have the skills they have, and it's not magic. But then what you do is build their skills, right? So you can have, unfortunately, you might appoint people that for different reasons, because you didn't have the right candidates, because there were some political games, whatever the reason. But if it is the case, then the next step is you build the skill sets. So doing the self-assessment, doing the gap analysis still allows you to identify what's missing at the board level. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Most welcome. Okay, next bullet point. So one more click, Bijal. Thank you. So yes, David Nadler was also speaking about making sure that you have the right role. And that goes back to the discussion that we had with Andy before. How engaged do you need to be? And this is where in the article, he was describing the different type of boards, so passive, certifying, engaged, intervening, and operating. And Nurani actually gave an example a little bit earlier. So very often you become super executive, like a board becomes super executive when everything goes wrong. And it can be the case, like sometimes you have to get rid of the CEO because she or he did something wrong. And at that moment, of course, the board has to intervene, the board has to step in. But generally speaking, in your kind of industry and in what you're doing, the best model would be the engaged board. So being this board with totally aware of what's going on, asking the right question, but again, using the sentence that Aileen liked, nose in, fingers out, right? So that would be the best model. I'm looking at the chat, I think there was a question that looks like it. Yeah, so you were looking for the article. I hope you all find it. And if not, maybe Bijal or Rebecca, we can circulate it again. All right, next bullet point, please. All right work. What to do, the prioritization. Wow, yes, big thing, very important thing, especially in the case of a worldwide pandemic, right? All of a sudden, everything becomes so much more complicated than just the day before. So it's important when you go through your set of responsibility as a board to actually put priority, right? Decide on really what you need to achieve. And that also goes back to the first slide that we had, which means you have to build an agenda. That's something that basically the CEO has to help you with. Remember that CEO participate as well and consistently and constantly to the board performance actually, and the CEO should be involved in this agenda building, bringing to the board the topics of interest, the things that the board should be knowing, right? So it's a two-way street. Yes, the board should ask questions, but the CEO has to inform the board as well of anything happening and critical. And when you build an agenda, make sure you time it. Make sure that actually you want to go through all the different things that you have and prioritize. It might seem very basic, but you would be very surprised to know how many boards actually don't do that, and so basically don't perform, because then you open the door to, you know, questions and discussion that go around and around and around. And we have gone through that, and some of you participate in ICANN, so probably you have heard that in the old ICANN, it was very often the case. It was the case where we were opening the door to a big discussion and we were never quite closing the loop. So it's actually important to prioritize and structure. Okay. And I see no questions, so I'm going to go to the next bullet point. Thank you.
A question there is one of the challenges, and this really relates to a discussion I had with somebody who joined a board somewhere else, and he said that all his ambitions sort of ground to a halt the minute he actually went to the first board meeting, and he realized that everything he was seeing from the outside that he wanted to fix, when he got inside, there was so much worse things going on there inside it. And one of the challenges, I guess, that I would see on boards is that a lot of the work that's done is below sea level, so no one actually sees it, and it has to be that way for various reasons. And how do you prioritize the work that is visible to the outside world against what actually has to be sorted behind the scenes? And that's one of the challenges. That conversation was very, before this man had joined this board, he had said that this was his plan, and he had a platform that he was being elected on. And afterwards, and I said, why didn't you do it? He said, I opened the door to the board and it was a grinding halt. Basically, everything that I had wanted to do was not possible for 20 reasons. So how do you balance that? How do you balance the bits that you want to do, whether it's strategy, PR, risk, financials, whatever it is, against what actually has to be done there? And how do you sort of balance those two things?
Mm-hmm. Good question, Aileen. Well, being a good board doesn't mean necessarily being popular, right? For a start. So you were talking about how do you do what people want to see? Well, if the priority is actually something else, which is something that people don't see, this is where you have to focus your attention, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is this is where you, unfortunately, if the board is too busy, like if you have too many things to accomplish, this is where you can use committees. And this is where you also have to make sure that you have board members that are willing to undertake the job. So if you have disengaged board members or people that are not going to be reactive or not even answer emails, that sometimes happens, right? That's going to be complicated to do your workload. But there are a number of things that you can put in place to actually make sure that you align between priorities and competing priorities, I would say, right? But really, it's unfortunately it's not a beauty contest. So yes, you want to please your community, you want to please your stakeholders, right? It's definitely the case of most organizations. But at the same time, your responsibility, your hat there is actually a whole lot of different things. And you can't take the risk of not doing those things, right? Your responsibility is to talk about the strategy, talk about the fiscal oversight, managing the risk, all those kind of things that might not be the first thing that your community or stakeholders want to see, but are still critical. Balancing that, again, workload, right? Workload issues. So maybe committees, maybe, of course, also relying on the work that you can do with the CEOs. Maybe there are things that can be done at an operational level, be better prepared at an operational level so that the board has less work to do, right? Because what you don't want to do either is basically, I give you an example. If you need to discuss the risk, the background work should be done by the staff, right? By the management, etc. And then they bring to the table something that the board can review. You are not forced to do it on your own. You're not forced to do it from scratch, right? So I'm not sure I'm really answering exactly what you need to hear, but there are different aspects to the questions, right? But one key thing is to understand, as a board member, sometimes you can't focus on what your stakeholders want you to focus on.
Yeah, and I don't know that there is an answer to the question. I suppose one of the thoughts in relation to this was this particular person who brought this to my mind. When he went up for re-election, it was basically thrown at him. You said you were going to do X, Y, and Z. And then there was a new candidate who hadn't been on the board who was saying, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And people were saying, well, you didn't do it. It's now his chance to do it. Whereas if you've been on a board and you know that there are other challenges behind the scene that you can't really bring out, you can't wash the laundry in public, then the challenge there is like, how do you create the momentum for you to be re-elected in order to complete those tasks, rather than bringing in somebody new who's going to get disheartened by the fact that actually all progress stops at the door because there's something else going on. And I don't know that there is an answer to it. It's more of a cohesive board actually getting things done. And as you said about the management, actually doing a lot of the grunt work to make sure that the board is fast moving.
Yes, it's fast moving because of of good preparation. Okay, but also I guess that basically you have to have a strategy, and when you have a strategy, you have a line. You have a line of what needs to happen, right, to complete with this strategy. Maybe you need to detail a little bit more the strategic goals and the strategic objectives, and how you will achieve those. Then will help you basically answer this question, right? If it doesn't fall within your strategic plan, if it doesn't fall within the goals that you have established, and they have to be timed. We're not talking about open goals, right? We're also talking about, okay, within the coming years, we should be doing this, and within the coming 5 years, because most of the time we're talking about 5 to 10 years strategic plan, then you have to have milestones. And that's where you have to align what you do. What the board does has to be aligned with those strategic goals. Does that help a little bit further?
Can I just add? I think it's interesting what Eileen brings up, because I think it also comes back to realistic understanding of what the role of the board is, and also both with the candidates running for it, and then when you're actually on the board. And because I think there's often this perception that I'm just going to get on the board and I'm going to fix everything. But it's not your role as a board member to fix the color of the logo or the flow of that form or whatever operational matters there are. So I think it's also coming back to that thing about, if it's in your interest to be re-elected, to also be very honest and clear about that. These are the things that I can or should be doing as a board member. If you have a problem with the logo, then you need to speak to the staff, and that's not something that a board member can or should get involved with.
Very good point, Nourani, and that goes back to what we just learned, right? So the mission, the board member, the newcomer to the board, has to understand why he is being elected, right? What is the purpose of the organization, and stick to that, and stick to the role of the board, and not to be too involved. Yes, absolutely. It's all part of the same thing, Aileen, but there are different aspects to that and different things that can be done to try to mitigate, right? Okay. If we have no more question, we can go to the next bullet point, which is already on the screen. So the right people. Yes, good team starts with good recruitment. Keep learning and developing individually and as a team. Again, it's a little bit like the self-assessment. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable to go to a board member and tell, you know what, I think actually you should develop this or that, because basically we believe that we need you to improve on even sometimes on your behavior, right, and being more engaged, etc. So it's a touching thing. It's a touchy thing, sorry, but this is crucial. And having a good recruitment process in place is also critical. And so that's where it goes back to the self-assessment, because if you identify before a recruitment phase, if you have people stepping down the board, okay, the person was so good at that, and that, then you know that you want to try at least. I'm not saying it's going to be feasible, Nourani, but at least you have to try to get back those skills, right, on the board. And that's a process that I would think that you're all familiar with the challenge of basically keeping motivated and keeping learning and keep it growing, etc. It's difficult, right? And at some stage you just reach a stage where you go like, well, I know all those things, but yeah, try to keep this mind of willing to learn and willing to grow together and individually. Sorry. All right, next bullet points. Right agenda. I think we have covered that multiple times now. So as we mentioned, partner with the CEO. So it's a two-way street. So you as board, you ask question, you know what is going to happen in the organization, yes, but to make sure that you are really well aware, ask the right question. And on the other hand, the CEO's responsibility is also to drag your attention to critical things where he needs the board's input, right? Stay focused, keep engaging when necessary and not necessary during board meetings. What does that mean? When you actually have this interaction with the CEO, it's particularly important for the board chair, of course. It's not only when you have board meetings. This relationship is an ongoing thing. And the more interaction you have with the CEO, well, the more interaction the board has with the CEO, the better it goes. And it's also going to solve, again, this problem of workload, Aileen, because there are things that can be done at the level of the staff and of the management. And this is actually the responsibility of the staff and the management to make sure the board can deliver and provide basically input, or even sometimes just a rubber stamp, but make sure that the board doesn't have to do it all, right? So make sure that this partnership with the CEO is an ongoing one. All right, next one. Thank you. Right info as right question. I think everything is clear now. We have said that over and over and over. Next one. Thank you. Right culture, be engaged. Yes, and we are going to go deeper on the engagement. That's going to be to your point earlier, Nurani. And I think there is one more bullet point, but I hope we can see it on the screen. No, there isn't. Okay, perfect. No, I think that was right. Thank you so much, Bijal. All right, so that's a little picture. We are going to briefly go through it so that it makes sense to all of you. So we start with, if you define the role, so if you define what type of board you want, whether you want an engaged board, a passive board, or a intervening board, so it's a discussion that you have to have in your organization. Again, who wants to have a passive board and who wants to have an intervening board? Most of good functioning organizations want to have an engaged board, right? Well, you define those roles, then you develop a vision for this board. Out of it, you determine the structure and the agenda, so how you are going to implement and deliver on this vision, right? You evaluate, that's another critical part, of course, of your success as a board. You evaluate your performance on a regular basis of self-assessment. And then out of this self-assessment, you identify the skills that you want on the board and you recruit, if possible. If you don't have the right set of people in the pool, you will fix it. You will fix it by training and orienting, right? But even if you have the right set of people, you still have to go through this training, development, and orientation program, of course. And then the last point, but this is also important, you acknowledge and you celebrate. One thing that we see very often in organization is that the board is either so busy or so disengaged that they actually don't even celebrate, right? And sometimes you have to have that. You have to build this culture of actually, yeah, we have succeeded. We are proud of ourselves. You have to build this because it creates a positive vibes. Okay, were you familiar with this development cycle? Does that speak to you? I guess it's relatively basic, but you might have questions. And I see no, so we can go to the last part of this discussion, which is about how do we get to this board that we want so much, which is an engaged board, right? Well, that's not nice to to have to be accountable, right? It's a responsibility, but that's crucial. Yes, you can have an engaged board if you don't hold board members accountable. It's not about blaming each other, not at all. It's about making sure that board members realize that they are taking responsibilities. When you join a board, you agree with the fact that you are going to work for an organization, and that entails some responsibilities. And you have to hold each other accountable as well, right? So that's part of the team building as well. Basic rules of respect: start meetings on time, be respectful of each other's time, right? We have seen many times board members but that actually don't really care. They joined late, or they don't even join, they don't even bother to apologize. Not a good way to build an engaged board culture, right? Hold the executive director and CEO accountable. Same thing, not the best part of the job, but yes, the CEO has responsibilities and is responsible for making sure that the board is duly informed of what is happening in the organization. Crucial as well. Have board members to work together and build a team culture. Now that's a question I have for those of you who are on the board, whether the EuroIX or other boards. Is that something you do? So do you have team building exercise?
I can say for EuroRx, we haven't. We've actually talked about it in the past, but we've never actually done one. But I mean, listening to you today, I think it's definitely something that would be helpful and beneficial for us. So yeah,
and you know, you might actually enjoy it. So it's not something which is supposed to be again to be heavy. And no, it's to the contrary, and it doesn't need to be focusing on what you as an organization are doing. It can be totally different. It can be actually learning about each other. It can be fun to understand, because at the end of the day, you're a team. You work as a team, and so you want to know your team members, right? So it's also building this kind of good vibe between each other. It can be as well during those COVID time. That's something that is happening in many boards for the moment. Social things, right? Social calls. So don't meet only because of a board meeting. Maybe you want to have a social call. Maybe you want to have once a month, you know, something fun to discuss. That could be an opportunity as well, because it creates a willingness as well to be together, right? And to work together and to succeed together. Do you have a tip for team building remotely? Yeah, very, very good question, Daniela. I haven't experienced that. I've run team building in the past, but always face to face, I have to admit. But what I just mentioned, actually, I didn't see your question before, but a social call could be a good start. It's not going to be a team building, but it helps. It helps actually making sure that people have pleasure being together, and it's also building trust. So we discussed a little bit before with Aileen asking the question about how do we do for, you know, committees doing something and then it goes to the board and people start questioning what the committee did, because of trust. And the more you know people, the more you know people from your team, the more you trust them. So it can be very basic. You can have, as I say, a social call. Everybody, you launch a topic, right? It could be, I don't know, what's your best childhood memory? And you have people talking about that. And then you understand that basically some people that you would not even imagine it, they are fun, they're nice, they are different from the image that you have when they are just seated at the board table, right? So that could be an opportunity. But no, I have to dig a little bit further to come up with tips for team building remotely.
One of the things, while we haven't done, well, certainly not in my time on the board, we haven't done it in EuroRx of the official team building stuff. The thing that I see really helps the board develop is we twice a year have full day meetings at one of the board members in one of the board members' cities. So the most recent one we had actually was Economicus in Greece, and we all went there. And the night before, they take whoever is hosting takes you to a restaurant, and it's being fancy is not important, but being real is. And having the dinner the night before the full meeting makes an enormous difference, I think, to the way that the meeting goes the following day than our normal typical meetings. So it's kind of already got over all of the how are you doing, all of that sort of stuff that is part of the person you personally take to the board meeting. So I think there's a fluidity to those meetings that perhaps I don't see in the normal Zoom call meetings, because we have had that chance to decompress and, you know, chat about each other and everything else. So I think that as a team building exercise, even sharing food is a big deal. And then the lunches that you have when you have the full day face to face. COVID does make that difficult, but I think in normal times that certainly helps the board of EuroRx that I have seen anyway.
Mm-hmm. No, and you're so right, Aileen. You're so right. And if you see the last bullet point there says, have some fun and laugh, in the sense that it's difficult enough to be on the board of an organization and do the right thing and do the right choices. And sometimes it's very hard, actually. So if you don't have fun being together, if you don't have those moments where you can actually just relax and be yourself and tell good things and share other aspects from your life, it's extremely hard. And yeah, you're right, sharing food, or, you know, even going, we did organize with other boards some cultural trips, right? So just taking a day, you're visiting a city, you take a day to a museum, or you have speakers could be actually very good as well. So you choose, and you can do that jointly, and with your CEO you choose basically a topic And it doesn't have to be immediately related to the board activity. It could be related to something that everyone wants to hear about, right? And you take a speaker and you have a 2-hour speech about an interesting topic, right? So that could be actually, Daniela, that could be something. Why not? That can be done remotely. So you choose a speaker about something which could be of interest to your board members. Why not? Yeah. Okay, if we go back, forgot which bullet points, have board members work together more. So I think that was the point. No, it was, yes, it was team building, sorry. Foster a culture of inquiry and build a learning organization. Same thing, we have discussed that over and over again. We can go a little bit deeper if we have time on what is the good training. Actually, what does that mean? Training has 3 different parts. So you have the onboarding. That's the part you want to make sure that you provide the newcomers with the basic skills they have to have, the basic knowledge about the organization. Of course, the missions, they have to understand the mission, but also they might have to review the latest set of minutes, what the latest decision the board did over, let's say, the past 6 to 12 months, so that at least they join the board knowing what happened recently. If you have, and you should, if you have a strategic plan, they should be familiar with the strategic plan. So that's all part of the onboarding process. And then you have what we call the development training, which basically says we have identified some gaps in your skills. Maybe you want to go for training. That depends, of course, of the budget of the organization. But again, they are institutes that are relatively cheap, if not for free. Institute of Directors, for example. And then, sorry, I'm distracted by the chat. I was trying to see what was going on. So yeah, onboarding, development are the key aspects of the training that you want to try to build. And then you create this appetite for learning, right? As individual board member and as a board. So you can have individual training plans, but you should also train as a board. Maybe actually it's part of the team building exercise as well. You can learn new skills together. That could be something else also to explore. Help the board to see the executive director and CEO as a partner and not as their staff. That goes back to the point, yes, the CEO reports into the board. The CEO is accountable in the sense that at the end of the day, the board decides whether the CEO has performed and stays or has to leave, right? For sure, but it is above all a partner and things have to be done together. And again, not only during board meetings, but it's an ongoing relationship. Divide up the basic governance roles, but have everyone involved in the key activities through which the board can impact the organization. That speaks to what we have reviewed earlier with the workload, right? So getting organized and making sure that the board is not totally overwhelmed is critical as well. Focus on what is really going to make or break the organization. Goes back to the strategic thinking discussion, right? But that's also how you get the board engaged, because during those times where you actually discuss together about the threats and the opportunities and the things that are going to impact your organization, this is also where you actually build this culture of engagement. And last but not least, have some fun and love. Is that helpful to actually understand a little bit better how to work together and build engagement? Right, okay. So I think with that, we can go to the next slide. Thank you so much, Bijan. And so, yes, I think this is actually the last slide. So we are a little bit in advance, which is good. It's actually a little bit, well, those are tips, right? Those are only guidelines on how you basically can enhance this board culture. You have to have in mind constantly your role and responsibilities. Unfortunately, that's the part of it you have to keep in mind. But it's also very important to, it's a question of personalities. And sometimes it's not easy. It's definitely not common, basically, to have people that are willing to change their worldviews and open, basically, their judgment to others, judgment to I think this is called active listening, right? When you have, and we see that very often on the board, changing your mind or listening actively to others is complicated. But at some stage, unfortunately, that's also crucial because you're going to have to build consensus. And this is where you really have to work as a team and to learn each other and to build this trust among each other as well, right? If you don't agree with this person or those person, you have at least to disagree respectfully. Not easy either. I've seen some nasty things happening in board meetings, and I don't know if you have witnessed that yourself, but yeah, sometimes people have very strong views, and trying to, basically have those consensus building, it's not always that easy. Very recently, I witnessed, very rude actually interaction between board members, and that's not something that you want to see because that can really break the atmosphere. Right? Cherish and embrace diversity. Now, here it can be a little bit touchy, and I'm sure that it's going to speak to some of you. It's big, it's high for the moment, let's say, in boards to have to tick the box on how many women are on the board, right? I understand. I totally, I'm a woman myself. I understand where this comes from, but that's not what you want. You want a woman because she is the right person to be appointed on the board. If she is not better than a man, then you should have the man, right? I mean, if they are equal, of course, that's a choice. But if the man is better, you should have the man. You don't want to just tick the box of diversity, right? You just want to have the best person on your board. Strength comes from finding consensus among diverse perspectives and opinions. We just discussed that. Participate fully and make best effort to be constructive. Again, that's something that you can enhance by having team building and not seeing each other only as team members, but also as individuals with passion and interest and personalities that are so enriching. And last but not least, be consistent and disciplined in applying processes. Yes, if you have processes, they have to be applied. So those, as I was saying before, it's just little tips, right? Key things that you have to keep in mind to try to build a better board and some engagement. All right, and I think with that, we have gone through all the deck. Is that correct, Bija? Yes, all right. So yes, the last slide speaks for itself. So if you have question, and it doesn't have to be on what you have seen during the deck. Really make this last 10 minutes your own. So if you have question about specific issues or specific aspects that haven't been mentioned here, please bring it to the table. Let's discuss. I will try to help. Those last 10 minutes are for you.
That was great. Thank you, V. Do we have any questions?
I think this is the moment where people are like, it's been a 2 hours training and we're tired. It's a Zoom fatigue.
Yeah, it does. Oh, we have Franco. Franco has a question.
Hello. Thank you, Vinciane, for sharing this wealth of information. I have a couple of questions. On the topic of board responsibilities, I reckon that when a mission statement and strategy are clearly formulated, they keep the board focused on their responsibilities and guide their decisions about which projects to undertake and which to avoid. Therefore, I have 3 questions in one. First one, how often do you consider that the board should revise their mission statement? Additionally, how important do you consider it is ensuring that new board members fully understand their organization's mission? And the final one is, do you consider that it would be efficient to do both at the same time by sharpening both their understanding of the mission and their commitment to maintaining their mission updated?
Wow, very good and interesting question. So thank you, Franco, for that. So to the first question, which is how often should they review their vision? Well, I think, Eileen, you had mentioned that, was that Eileen or Andy? I forgot, but initially that you haven't reviewed the vision of, the mission of EuroIX in the past years, but still, things have been evolving. So what you are doing, actually, the content of what you are doing is different and has evolved over the 20 years. Was that you, or maybe Andy mentioning Elena? I forgot.
I'm not quite sure. I think Andy had talked about that. Certainly my comments that remind me of what you just said was more to do with the articles and that, but I don't know, to be honest, Fee.
Okay, sorry for that. Yeah, I don't want to put you under the spotlight, but I had in mind something along those lines. So basically, Franco, there isn't any rule about when do you revise your mission statement. I think that if the organization changes over time organically, because there is a need for the organization to adapt to the environment, this is when the board can actually review the mission statement. What is critical, though, is yes, the mission shouldn't be changing every year, and you shouldn't be basically, incorporating tasks to your list just because of external pressure. You have also a role and a purpose. So it's a balance to find, right? And if for the survival of the organization you need to adapt the mission statement, then do it. But then do it just for the sake of it, right? Then I forgot, what was the second question about the onboarding, right? To measure how board members would be aware of their mission. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if we can really measure how aware a board member is, except during the self-assessment, right? So during the onboarding process, when this person comes on the board, yes, of course, that's part of the CEO's responsibility to actually make sure that they are made aware of their duties and of the mission of the organization. And then it's part of the self-assessment, but you will also notice anywhere if a board member is not fully understanding what is role and what the mission of the organization is. And then you can fix that, actually. And what was the third question, the third element?
If you consider it would be efficient to revise the mission, and at the same time using that as an opportunity to make sure that the board members understand the mission correctly.
Yeah, well, again, to me, and that might be just a personal view, but I think if the survival of the organization depends on the revision of the mission statement, it might be critical to do it, right? But I don't think it has to be merged in any way with the measurement of how well the board members understand their mission. I think again that's something that can be done through assessment.
Thank you, Vinciane.
Most welcome. Any other question?
In this industry, new organizations and associations sort of spin up to answer industry needs or no industry needs sometimes. So let's say, for example, we had decided as a community that we needed an organization focused on delivering X. Where would you start? So you gather together 5 interested parties, they've agreed to be the first board. What documents would you do? Where would you start if you were starting from scratch of an organization? What's the things you would have in place before you would even do anything else? Or is there anything? Or do you need to have got further down the road before you put in place the governance documents and the organizational controlling documents? But what would you do if you were asked to participate in a brand new board? What would you do?
Well, that goes back to the slide about the development. You first have to understand the vision, right? You have to understand what are you going to do. What's the point of this organization? So, okay, you created something. You have a board. Okay, fine. But what is your purpose? What do you need to do? What do you need to achieve? And then, of course, from that you develop. I think before even going through, you have to set up some basics for your organization. So yes, governance documents, or at least, it depends of the sorry, I'm missing the word in English, of the structure of the organization that you choose, right? So the framework that you want to put in place for this organization, you have to get that right. But then the next step, of course, it would be the strategic plan. So are you talking in terms of documents, or are you talking in terms of the different steps that we would take to start from scratch?
I'm more supposed talking about the documents. So whether or not when you start, and I could see the purpose obviously has to be, that happens, I guess, before you've even decided to come to the conclusion of setting up an organization and incorporating an entity. So when you've done that, do you require, or would you be saying, okay, the first thing, obviously you need a set of articles if you're going to incorporate the organization, but is it things like, things like director's duties or conflict of interest policy? Like, what are the things that you can't really go past, let's say, the first month without saying, actually, we need to have these basic rules in place for how this organization is going to manifest itself in the industry?
Mm-hmm. Well, you just named them. So yes, you have defined the mission, right? The purpose of the organization. Then, of course, you have what I was describing as the framework. So the bylaws, basically the article of association, depending on the type of organization you would have. And then, yes, you named it. So conflict of interest policy, a basic governance document as well about, the duties of the board members. For sure, you want to have that in place. What else? Well, you have to agree to the basics that you would be doing as well, like the annual review, for example, of the financials, the audit review, the external audit reviews, all those kind of aspects have to be as well somehow formalized, right? But it very much depends, Aileen, where you would be basing your organization, because rules are also different from one country to another. For example, when I looked at EuroIX is incorporated in the Netherlands, and I had to actually go and check a few things because I wasn't familiar with the requirement for an organization incorporated in the Netherlands. If I look at ICANN, it's incorporated in the States. It's extremely different. You have a whole different set of rules. So the first things you want to do is to make sure, and definitely as a board member, that you're compliant with the rules of where the organization will be based. Right, and out of that, then of course you have a full set of documents to provide. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Welcome. And I don't.
I'll throw the question if there is time.
Yes. There still is. And I'm not on the clock, so please feel free.
Okay, great. It comes back to the issue of non-profit boards and sort of relying on volunteers often to fill those boards. And I think one of the challenges, not just in our industry, but in many industries, is to find that diversity that you were talking about. And sometimes that is simply the diversity. It comes down to actually finding the candidates to start with, not just likewise when you then actually have your slate of candidates to try to select from that. And I think one of the challenges is often that you might not be particularly clear to potential volunteers or potential candidates what a role at the board entails, how much work is required, what skill level is required, if they get training, if all those things. And I think that in itself actually puts up barriers for people. So you only get a subset of people actually applying or throwing the name in the hat. So for me, I think one of the solutions that I've identified is that it's important that there's clarity around that, clarity around what time commitments, competence required, also how that board functions, how many meetings do they have, how much work are you supposed to do, how much time are you supposed to set aside. I was just wondering if you had any general, advice or any resources you could point to, anything like that, to make sure that, boards can improve on those things, like check boxes they can fill and things like that, or good common practices that they can really make sure to take into consideration to meet that.
Yes, thank you for the question, Ryan. A very good question, and again, many different things and aspect to that question. Basically, it also depends on the budget, right? In the sense that you were talking, for example, if I have a newcomer, should I tell him or can I tell her, or whether we even have trainings? Well, if you have no budget, this person will never get training, right? Unless he or she pays for it. So there are many different aspects related to that. I think what's important with regard to the workload is actually a very difficult question to answer. Tons and tons of board members initially think, well, it's going to be easy, right? It's a matter of meeting 3 times per year, 2 hours per day, and that's fine. I'm going to travel a little bit. I'm going to have a little bit of money, and super nice. And at the end of the day, it's terrible. It's not the case. You're going to spend hours on Zoom because of the pandemic, and in addition, and it's a lot more complicated and complex than they had ever expected. And this is also where you reach the point of having a disengaged board, because you have people that actually feels that this is it's an unbearable workload, and it is not what they have been told it would be. So trying to get that right is complex, it's difficult, but that's crucial, it's critical. So, and only the person that actually know the organization and know the board can decide whether it's, I'm just going to admit this person, it's a little late, but I hope it's going to be useful to him anyway. So basically, it's crucial to try to get that right. And as much, for example, as an external person, I would like to help. I wouldn't be able to know as much as you know about your own organization and what it needs to be done at the level of the board, right? What I can tell you though is it goes back to the aspect of getting the recruitment right. And what needs to be clear, probably you want also, it's basic, but you also want to have the advertisement for the position as clear as possible, right? In terms of the expectation, not only in terms of the workload, but what the organization is doing, the fact that this is going to be paid or not paid, the skill set that are required, etc. So I don't know in the case of your organization if you advertise for the position or if it's just words of mouth. Is that the right word in English? But all this actually can be improved, right? If you place an advertisement, if you try to build a pool from candidates, you have to get the right advertisement out. And I remember, if I speak 2 minutes about ICANN, a few years ago, you know the story maybe of ICANN. So ICANN was attached to the US government. It was a department of the, it was, if you want, a department of the Department of Commerce. And then we detached from the US government, and we became an an independent organization. And in the process, of course, we had to build a board. We had to, change the board structure, etc. And we wanted to attract different people on the board, but we didn't really know how to do that. We didn't have an experience on where to go and find the right candidates for this ICANN board. And in the context of ICANN, there is a nominating committee. So this is something which is outsourced, if you want. It's part of the ICANN community, but it's not something we have input on. And what we did with the non-com is basically we try to enlarge, we try to advertise ICANN where we haven't had advertised ICANN before. And I remember vividly, we placed advertisement, for example, in The Economist, because we wanted to attract people from outside the ICANN community. We wanted to attract people that had not been involved with ICANN, just because we wanted to have an external point of view, right? So people that would basically challenge the ICANN community to think differently, etc. So the recruitment process has to be thought through. It's not something that you can improve. You can't change your candidate pool if you don't change your recruitment process. And so you have to know what you are looking for, right? So defining exactly what you can offer, what it entails, workload, money, whatever, whether you're going to offer training or not, but also defining what you're after are the two critical aspects. And it's not easy, Norani. It's not going to be overnight. All right, and I don't know if it helped you, but I hope this session was useful to most of you. And Vijay, I guess that we can definitely share my email address, the one that is on the slides. If people feel like there are things that well, sometimes after a session like that, you come up with question or you didn't dare to ask question, please feel free to reach out. I might not be super fast to answer. It depends on my own workload, but I will definitely try to do my best.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that was really interesting. I certainly have learnt loads, so I'm excited to bring some of that to the EuroX board. So yeah, it was very interesting. Thank you so much for your time and the presentation. I just want to say as well that the presentation and the video will both be available on online soon. So you can watch out for that if you missed any of it or you wanted to see any of it again. So again, Vinciane, thank you so much. I can't, this has been really, really good. And
I think you made it good. I really want to say that. Thank you so much for having asked all those questions. Being, it's nice. You've been engaged. Wow, you didn't even need me. You guys rock. I hope you go and make the most out of whatever you have learned with your respective boards and communities. And I could not always give you the perfect answer because there are so many different aspects. But again, I think I'm ready to help you, and it's been a real pleasure to speak with you today. So thank you very much for the opportunity, because the other way around, I'm the one thanking you.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone that also joined. Yep, we'll have a good rest of the day, and we will see you all soon. Thank you, everyone.